During the time of Julius Caesar, most Romans lived a hard but active daily life. People in Rome woke up early, usually at sunrise. The city was crowded, loud, and dirty. Streets were narrow and full of people, animals, and carts. Many fires and building accidents happened. Most people lived in small apartment buildings called insulae. These buildings were unsafe, and poor people lived on the top floors and had to climb many stairs every day. Most Romans worked long hours. Poor men worked as laborers, builders, port workers, or sellers in markets. Shopkeepers sold bread, wine, oil, and simple goods. Craftsmen made shoes, pots, and tools. Slaves worked everywhere in homes, farms, shops, and offices. Slavery was normal in Roman life, and many families owned at least one slave. Food was simple for most people. Bread was the main food. People also ate olives, vegetables, cheese, and porridge. Meat was rare and usually eaten only during festivals. Many poor Romans depended on free grains given by the government. Julius Caesar made sure this grain supply continued so people would not starve or revolt. People collected water from public fountains. There was no water inside most homes. Public baths were very important. Romans went there to wash, relax, exercise, and talk with others. Baths were cheap and open to most people. Family life was controlled by father, who had full authority over the household. Women took care of the home and children and often helped with family businesses. They could not vote, but they were active in the markets, religion, and daily life. Politics was very visible. People gathered in forum to hear speeches, watch trials, and listen to the news. Julius Caesar was popular because he gave food, land, and public games. Festivals and gladiators shows were common and helped people escape their hard lives. Religion was part of the everyday life. Romans prayed at home, in temples, and during public events. They believed God's influence daily events, so rituals and sacrifices were important. Rich Romans lived very differently. They had large houses, servants, and gardens. They spent time in politics, meetings, and social events. Poor Romans depended on rich patrons for help and protection. A Roman gladiator lived almost his entire life inside a gladiator school called Theurus. This place was part prison, part training camp. Gladiators were watched by guards and could not come and go freely. Even famous gladiators were not truly free unless they earned it. The day started very early. Gladiators woke up at dawn. The first hours were for physical training. They ran, lifted heavy weights, practiced jumping, and strengthened their bodies. Strength and stamina mattered as much as fighting skill, because fights could last many minutes. After this came weapons training. Gladiators trained with wooden weapons that were heavier than the real ones. This made real weapons feel lighter during the fights. Each gladiator trained in one fighting style. Some used swords and shields. Some used nets and tridents. Some wore heavy armor, others very little. They practiced the same moves again and again until they became automatic. The training was not chaotic. It was carefully planned. Trainers, often former gladiators, taught technique, balance, timing, and how to control fear. Gladiators were taught how to fight in a way that looked exciting to the crowd, not just how to kill. Good performance mattered as much as winning. Meals were planned and controlled. Gladiators ate mostly barley, beans, lentils, vegetables, and bread. Meat was rare. This diet made them strong and slightly fat, which helped protect vital organs from deep cuts. They also drank special drink made from ash and vinegar to strengthen bones. After training, gladiators rested. Rest was important because injuries were common. Cuts, broken bones, and bruises happened all the time. Gladiators received better medical care than most Romans. Doctors treated wounds carefully because gladiators were valuable. A dead gladiator mean lost money. Afternoons were often spent practicing again, repairing armor, or learning tactics. Gladiators also learned how to read the crowd, how to beg for mercy, and how to show bravery. Fear was part of the daily life, but showing fear in the arena was shameful. Before a fight, tension filled the school. Gladiators prepared their weapons, oiled their bodies, and prayed to the gods. Some wrote farewell letters because they knew they might die. On fight days, they were taken to the arena and kept waiting in small rooms, listening to the crowd above. Not every fight ended in death. Many fights ended when one gladiator surrendered. The crowd and the sponsor of the games decided whether the defeated gladiator lived or died. Skilled and popular gladiators were more likely to survive. Famous gladiators became celebrities. People recognized them in the streets. Women admired them, and their names were written on the walls. Some earned money, gifts, or freedom. Freedom was shown by a wooden sword called Virius. Even after freedom, many chose to keep fighting because it was the only life they knew. At night, gladiators returned to their cells or shared rooms. They ate, talked, treated wounds, and prepared for the next day. Sleep came early because the body was always exhausted. The daily life of a Roman slave was hard and depended entirely on the type of work the slave did. Slaves had no freedom and no legal rights. They were owned like property. A slave's day usually started before sunrise. Slaves woke early because their masters expected work to begin immediately. What they did all day depended on where they worked. House slaves worked inside the home. They cleaned rooms, cooked food, fetched water, washed clothes, cared for children, and served meals. Some educated slaves worked as teachers, secretaries, or accountants. These slaves lived better lives than the others, but were still not free. They had to obey orders at all the times. Field slaves worked on farms and large estates. Their life was much harder. They worked long hours under the sun, planting crops, harvesting food, and caring for animals. Overseers watched them closely and punished mistakes. Food was simple and rest was limited. Mine slaves had the worst lives. They worked underground in dangerous conditions, breathing dust and working until exhaustion. Many did not live long. This was seen as a form of punishment. Slaves also worked in the workshops, construction, and public buildings. Some were trained as craftsmen, while others did heavy labor like carrying stones or goods. Food for slaves was basic, like bread, courage, and vegetables. Clothing was simple and rough. Most slaves slept in small rooms, kitchens, storage areas, or shared spaces. Privacy did not exist. Punishment was common. Masters could beat slave or sell them. Fear was part of daily life. However, some masters treated slaves better, especially those who were loyal or skilled. Religion and festivals offered small breaks from work. During some festivals, slaves were allowed to rest or eat better food. Hope for freedom was important. Many slaves believed that good service might lead to manumission, meaning they could be freed. Freed slaves became freedmen, but still dependent on their former masters. A Roman general under Julius Caesar lived a very different life from ordinary people. His daily life depended on whether he was in Rome or in military campaign, but discipline and power shaped everything he did. When a general was on campaign, his day started very early, often before sunrise. He lived in a large tent, not a palace. After waking up, he met with his officers to plan the day. They discussed enemy movements, supplies, marching routes, and discipline. The general had to think constantly about food, weapons, and morale, because a hungry or tired army could fail. After meetings, the general inspected the troops. Roman generals cared a lot about discipline of the soldiers. They trained it every day, even during the war. The general watched drills, punished disobedient, and rewarded bravery. Roman soldiers respected strict leaders, and authority was maintained through clear rules and fear of punishment. Much of the day was spent giving orders, writing letters, and receiving messengers. Generals constantly communicated with Rome, allies, and other commanders. They also kept records of victories and decisions because political reputation mattered as much as military success. Meals were simple, even for generals. They ate bread, vegetables, cheese, and wine, often the same food as the soldiers. Living simply helped the general gain respect. Julius Caesar himself was known for sharing hardship with his men, and other generals followed his example. In the afternoon or evening, the general planned future moves. He studied maps, questioned scouts, and listened to advice. Though the final decision was always his, before nightfall, security checks were done to prevent surprise attacks. At night, the general often worked by lamplight. He wrote reports, planned speeches, or thought about politics. A Roman general was not just a soldier, but also a politician. Success in war could lead to power in Rome, so every action had political meaning. When a general was in Rome, his life changed but remained busy. He attended Senate meetings, met supporters, spoke in public, and defended his actions. He wore formal clothing and showed dignity and self-control. He also hosted dinners to build loyalty among the elites. Religion was part of his daily life. Generals performed sacrifices, consulted priests, and watched for signs from the gods before major decisions, and this was taken very seriously. A Roman senator lived a busy life and a very public life. His day was centered on politics, status, and influence. The day started early, usually at sunrise. A senator woke up in his large house in the city or on a nearby estate. After washing and dressing in a white toga, he held the morning greeting called salutatio. Clients, poor citizens, came to greet him, ask for help, or show loyalty. In return, the senator offered advice, protection, or small gifts. This relationship gave the senator power and respect. After the morning greetings, the senator went to the forum, the center of the Roman political life. There, he attended Senate meetings, listened to speeches, debated laws, and voted on decisions. Not every senator spoke, but being present mattered. Politics in Rome was loud, competitive, and public. Much of the day was spent talking and negotiating. Senators formed alliances, argued with rivals, and tried to gain support. Personal reputation was extremely important. A senator's honor, family name, and public image decided his success. Around midday, business slowed down. The senator might return home for a light meal, usually bread, fruit, and wine. Afternoons were often spent managing estates, reading, writing letters, or meeting visitors. Many senators owned land and slaves, so they had to supervise finances and property. Religion was part of daily life. Senators took part in religious ceremonies, sacrifices, and festivals. Many held priestly roles, which increased their status. Romans believed the gods protected the state, so religion and politics were closely connected. In the evening, the senator often attended or hosted a dinner party. These dinners were important for politics. Guests discussed ideas, shared news, and built alliances. Good food, entertainment, and conversation showed wealth and culture. At night, the senator prepared for the next day. He reviewed speeches, planned political moves, or studied philosophy and history. Education and speaking skills were very important for a senator. A Roman tax collector lived a busy but unpopular life. Tax collectors were necessary for the Roman state, but ordinary people often disliked them. Most tax collectors woke up early. They worked either in Rome or in the provinces. Their job was to collect the taxes for the government, such as land tax, trade tax, or customs duties. Many tax collectors were not senators, but wealthy businessmen called publicani, or their employees. In the morning, a tax collector went to his office. A market, a port, or a tax station on the road. Merchants, farmers, and traders came to declare goods or pay taxes. The tax collector checked records, measured goods, counted coins, and wrote accounts. Writing and math were important skills for this job. Much of the day involved arguing. People tried to pay less tax, hide goods, or complain about unfair charges. Tax collectors had legal power, so they could fine people, seize property, or call soldiers if needed. Because of this power, many abused the system and collected more than required, keeping the extra money for themselves. Meals were simple and taken quickly during work. Bread, olives, cheese, and wine were common. There was a little rest during the day because trade and travel continued constantly. In the afternoon, the tax collector reviewed accounts and stored money securely. Theft was a serious risk. Guards were often hired for protection, especially in the provinces where locals hated Roman rule. Tax collectors were often looked down on. Senators considered them greedy, and common people saw them as corrupt. However, tax collectors could become very rich and live comfortably in private life. In the evening, a tax collector returned home, checked records again, and planned the next day. Some offered sacrifices to the goods for the protection because the job was risky. Violence against the tax collectors was not rare. The daily life of a Roman soldier was strict, repetitive, and physically hard. Discipline was the most important part of his life. A soldier woke up before sunrise when the trumpet sounded. He cleaned his weapons and armor first, because Roman soldiers were responsible for their own equipment. Then he ate a simple breakfast, usually bread and porridge. Most of the day was spent training, even when there was no war. Soldiers practiced marching, running, swimming, and carrying heavy loads. They trained with swords and shields, often using heavier weapons than real ones to build strength. Discipline was harsh, and punishment for mistakes could be severe. When the army was on the move, soldiers marched long distances, sometimes over 20 miles a day. At the end of the march, they built a camp every single night. Soldiers dug ditches, built walls, and set up tents. This was done even in enemy land, rain or cold. Food was simple and repetitive. Soldiers ate bread, grain, beans, vegetables, and sometimes meat. They cooked their own food in small groups. Wine was common, but watered down. When not training or marching, soldiers did manual labor. They built roads, bridges, forts, and buildings. A Roman soldier was also a worker and an engineer. Guard duty was part of the life. Soldiers took turns watching the camp, gates, and supplies. Falling asleep on guard duty was a serious crime. Free time was limited. Soldiers talked, repaired gear, played dice, and wrote letters. They were not allowed to marry officially during service, though many had relationships. Religion was important for them too. Soldiers prayed, made offerings, and believed the gods protected the army. Before battles, sacrifices were made to ask for victory. At night, soldiers slept in shared tents and their unit. Comfort was minimal. Life was controlled by orders and routine.